We'll finish the series today that I started 3 weeks ago on being sons, not servants. And from Luke chapter 15, verse 22, I'll go back and read a little bit more of the story of the prodigal later in the message. But just verse 22. When the prodigal had come home, the father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand, and shoes on his feet." And certainly believe it was no accident at all that Jesus, when he told this parable, mentioned the robe intentionally. And we found out the robe represents the righteousness, the right relationship that was given back to the Son, the robe of righteousness. Last week we talked about the ring of authority. Put a ring on his hand. All of the authority that is within the power of God. God has given this authority back to his children. And we read last week a few of the specific applications that come from the authority represented by the ring. And shoes on his feet. There are a couple of rather familiar passages, very familiar passages from the Old Testament, when either God or an angel, or if you read carefully, even one of the passages I read now, the angel that comes, the person that comes and talks to Joshua is most likely Jesus himself, because later it refers to him as the Lord. But people are reminded, take off your shoes. Take off your sandals. And one short verse in the Old Testament, the book of Ruth, what does this symbolize? What does this represent? Ruth chapter 4, verse 7. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. So it's the giving up of rights. This was just a custom. We could question them as to how in the world did you come up with this? To confirm a transaction, one person drew off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was concerning redeeming, purchasing, and exchanging. And what a beautiful parallel to the exchange of our sins for righteousness, for a relationship, for authority. The exchange that God decided to make with us when we receive Jesus Christ and believe in Jesus Christ. This exchange takes place, and if we really felt like it, we could go ahead now and we could symbolize that by taking off our shoes and telling God, I remember what they did in the Old Testament. I now give my rights to you. Story from Deuteronomy, another place where shoes were exchanged, you might say. Deuteronomy chapter 25. Going to be reading verses 7 through 10. Actually, I want to go back to verse 5 because it tells some of the responsibilities, some of the expectations of brothers. Verse 5. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his brother who is dead, and this name may not be blotted out of Israel. And if the man does not wish to take his brother's wife, Then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him. And if he persists, saying, I don't wish to take her. I don't want her. For whatever reason, you can guess what might be. If he says that, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull off his sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And then they change his name. And the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him that had his sandal pulled off. So we'll change his name. So from now on, if he goes in for whatever reason, he goes in to purchase a car or goes in to purchase a house or get a loan from a bank, and they ask him, what's your name? And evidently his first name is the. He says, my first name is the. What's your last name? I pulled off. Okay. Need to give me your whole name. The house of him that had his sandal pulled off. And probably the person, what'd she look like? Because they would have understood this was a custom. This was a custom of exchanging rights. And they said, if he persists, if he continues to say, I don't want, for whatever reason, I don't want to take her as my wife. I could make up several reasons I'm not going to. The same could be said for her. What if I don't want him? Well, then we will make a sign. We will verify this and show that it's true, because you will now take a sandal off his foot and spit in his face for whatever reason. And he has now given up his rights. Probably didn't want them, but he has given up his rights that were his. And the sign of that, take off your shoes. We know the passage of Moses coming to the burning bush, and a voice comes and says, take off your sandals, take off your shoes. The ground you are standing on is holy ground. You are now, if you want to speak to me, if you want to know me at this time, you need to give up your rights, just like was represented in Ruth. You give up your rights, and I become your father. Stay tuned. Later on, he gives these rights back. But you are now in my presence, in my holy presence, so holy that the ground that you are on is holy. And when you are in my presence, you need to give up your rights. Because I'm God. In Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 to 15, another very familiar passage, at least part of it, where Joshua is getting ready to go in and fit the battle of Jericho. He's getting ready to go in and fight Jericho. And this is where, if you read carefully the words here, it's very, very likely that this man that is talking to Joshua is Jesus Christ himself, because later on it refers to him as Lord. This is from Joshua chapter 5. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood before him with his drawn sword in his hand, and Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, no. Come back to that later. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, what does my Lord bid his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your shoes. Put off the shoes from your feet, for the place where you stand is holy. And Joshua did so. Take off your shoes. Give up your rights. And along with those rights, I believe, quite often we think we are right in everything that we think and everything that we do. Not always, but that thought gets in there. Give those up too. Give me all of your rights. And then Joshua says, so are you for us or are you for our enemies? Did you notice what probably Jesus said? He said, no. No, it angers my math students when they ask me a question that has an or in the middle. And I say either just no or yes. Which one? Which one? No. It is not important whether it's either one at this time. What does he say? He says, no. But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. What is important is who I am. I am now the commander. I am the commander of the Lord's army. And stay tuned, Joshua, because if you give me your rights, if you take off your shoes, if you give me your rights and your ideas and your dreams, at least for a little while, I'm going to ask you to do some very unusual things. Go on and read into Joshua chapter 6. We find out about him giving plans to circle and blow trumpets. And we're, what? This was not an idea that came from Joshua. This was an idea that came from the commander, because Joshua had given up his rights to control and to decide. And God, the commander, had said, this is what we're going to do. I am the commander. Just wait for the plan. And once I reveal the plan to you, and once you see what's going to happen, I will give you back these rights that are yours as my child. The rights of authority, the rights of a relationship, the rights of my power. All of these rights that come from the Father, he gives them back. So in essence, he says in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 15, it says, our feet have been fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. What? He gives back to his children the authority and the right, and especially the power to share his gospel. I certainly hope and pray that he gives this power to pastors. He gives this power to us. It's not mine. The power and authority to share the gospel is a right that we give up to him. And he says, I give it back to you because you are my child. You are my son. And you know what it means to have a father. Luke, in Luke chapter 15, reading again part of the story of the prodigal. Verse 31, my son, the father said, you are always with me. He's talking to the second son here. You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. Everything I have is yours. Let me read a few of the verses that I left out from the prodigal. The second son, and why, in these there are three parables in this one chapter. In these three parables, why did Jesus decide to include the older son? Start at verse 17. The prodigal, when he came to himself, we talked about that a couple weeks ago, when he had enough sense and he said, I've been an idiot. When he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise, I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy I am not worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." He arose, came to his father, but while he was yet at a distance, his father saw him and had compassion, ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." And before he could say he wanted to be treated like a servant, the father answered. Father said to his servants, "Bring quickly the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and make merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he's found." And they began to make merry. Now, his elder son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what this meant. And he said to him, "Your brother's come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he's received him safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, "Lo, these many years I have served you. I have been your servant, and I never disobeyed your command." That's questionable. "Yet you never gave me a kid, a goat, that I might make merry with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your living with harlots, you killed for him the fatted calf." And he said to him, the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to make merry and be glad. For this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and he's found." Why did Jesus include the story of this older son in this parable? There are three parables in this chapter. There's the parable of the lost sheep, where the shepherd has 100 sheep, 99 are still there, but one is lost. And it says he will go out and find it and place it on his shoulders and carry it back home. There's the story of the lost coin, where a woman had 10 coins, lost one of them, and looked everywhere she could, finally found it, and she called a party, and they rejoiced because she found a lost coin. And then the story of the parable, or what's the rejoicing about here? The rejoicing here is about the return of a son. Of a son. Why did Jesus include the second son? Look back at the very first verse of Luke chapter 15. "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them.' They don't deserve this. They haven't earned this. They are not hired servants." Now, the Pharisees didn't call themselves hired servants, but you check out all the other stories that Jesus tries to tell to these Pharisees to get their attention. They felt as though they earned the relationship. They felt as though they deserved the authority. And they deserved the rights and the powers that come through being a son. They felt like they had earned all of this. And the sinners, they don't deserve a thing, for heaven's sakes. Come on. That is the story. That is the truth. I believe that Jesus tried probably 100 times to get across to the Pharisees and anybody else that would listen. It's not about your works. It's not about your righteousness. It's not about how good you are or how good you are not. That has nothing to do with it. It's all about grace. This is a gift. And now I'm maybe putting words into Jesus' mouth. He says, Pharisees, if you think you earn all this stuff, you are so terribly wrong. You can never earn or be worthy of my grace, because my grace is a gift. And there is more joy in the return of one person who has left the fold and comes back into a relationship with me than over hundreds and thousands of people who are staying close. There is so much joy for that one that comes back. The prodigal had it absolutely correct. I am not worthy to be called your son. But then the father said, okay, I may be too strong here. I don't care how you feel about that. It doesn't change the way that I feel about you, that I know about you. I love you. God loves you. I love you whether you like it or not. I love you whether you are a sinner or a Pharisee. I love you because you are my child. Just please receive that. Notice that in the three parables, with the coin had nothing to do with it. The owner of the coin went out and looked for it until she found it and brought it back, had a party. The sheep had nothing to do with it. The shepherd went out looking for the sheep, put it on his shoulders, brought back home. The prodigal, when he came to his senses, when he realized all I have to do is turn around and go home, when he came to his senses and he changed his will, his desire, his heart, when he turned and made the first turn, what did the father do? The father ran. The father ran to him. And as you've probably heard, this is the only passage in all of Scripture where it talks about the father running to a child. He ran to the child because the child realized, I need to turn and go back. Be willing to be a servant, but God makes him a son. Let's pray.